this isn't second best. This was his plan from the
Mhm.
beginning. And it
Mhm.
may even be hard for some people to swallow that pill, but it's like I truly believe I was destined to meet Laura, and I was destined to raise these boys, and she was to
Mhm.
mother my daughter, and for us to be a family. This isn't second best. This is God's best, and I believe that, and that's what He's wanting to do. And I know a lot of people go through that, and I wanted that to be our story.
Today, my special guests are my good friends Laura and Christian, and we are going to be talking about their amazing podcast, Blended with Christian and Laura. It's wonderful to see you guys. It's been way too long. Welcome to the show.
So good to
Yeah,
see you. We're so excited.
yeah, it's been great. We've really been wanting to do this for a while, and it's been hard to make it work, but we finally got it worked out. So I'm excited.
I find if you reschedule at least 2 or 3 times, you can eventually make something work out. But we're all busy,
Yeah,
We got a
jobs,
lot of kids between us.
family, all the things.
yeah,
What is it between us? I'm working on number 11. You guys have
We have
5.
5.
So,
Yeah.
16 children amongst us. We all have
Yeah.
busy lives. So
yeah.
just be glad we could match our calendars up and make this conversation happen. I think I want to start out like usually at the beginning of a podcast. I'm always like, give me your origin story. And so I'd love to have you guys kind of give us the elevator pitch version of each of your
Yeah.
story. And then we can get out how you guys like came together and found each other. So Laura, we'll start with you. Just I'd love to give the audience a little bit of context, like what was your life like? Like what was going on before you met Christian?
Okay, so try to give it short version. I grew up Catholic. I got married super young, 18. Came from a really big family, very pretty on the outside, but really broken on the inside. So got married really young, didn't know who I was, didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus. Surrender. So the man that I married was in the military, and it brought us through a long series of events. I grew up in Ohio. I ended up in Georgia. So surrendered my life to the Lord in Georgia just through circumstances of finding this non-denominational church that I had no grid for, was not raised in charismatic or all of those things that I'm in now. So through all of that, trying to heal from how we were both raised, the brokenness in both of us, ended up in a marriage where there was a lot of infidelity, a lot of addiction. So I had 4 children, and we were a part of a really amazing church. We were in leadership. Just got to a place where I came to a crossroads, and it was really like I had this conversation with the Lord of I've got the responsibility of these 4 boys. At the time they were 13, 10, 4, and 1. And just realizing it was about more than just me to stay in this relationship. It was about what they experience, their safety, their health as well, and just really feeling the responsibility of that. And then really feeling like the Lord asked me, will you trust me to walk you out of this? So made that decision in counsel with great friends and leaders. So went through a divorce, was a really long process, really hard. My story is that the boys' biological father is not in their lives. So I raised them alone for 5 years, got a job. I was a stay-at-home mom and then went to full-time working. The Lord orchestrated all kinds of different things, every detail. Raised them for 5 years and really had such a strong desire to remarry and to do life with someone. Really, I just wanted to do life with someone. Um, but didn't know how that would happen, had no desire to date. And so was just doing my thing, and 5 years in, feeling pretty discouraged, like, will this season ever change? Will I just raise them alone? And they'll grow up and move on and I'll just be by myself. But then met Christian, so I won't get into all that, but that's kind of a nutshell of
Yeah.
It was a long elevator ride, but you got in all the good key points. One of the things that's always struck me, Laura, about your journey is how supportive like your pastoral folks in
Mm,
your life were of that kind of a decision.
yeah,
I know so many other church situations where pastors are like, you should just never get divorced. No, like always keep trying forever and ever and ever.
yeah.
Uh, was just, I'll go down this rabbit trail for a second. Like, was everybody in your circle supportive, or did you have some people like, this is the worst idea ever? Because a lot of times people are going to err, like, you should try to make this work till the cows come home. But
Right.
there are kind of points of no return where you, like you said, like you had to make decisions not just for you, but for all your boys. And so
Yeah.
that's a little out of the box. I've found most
Yeah.
pastors wouldn't steer somebody that direction.
I love this question. This is such a passion of mine to talk about more, especially in church circles. But no. So I had a ton of leadership that they were amazing. They followed the Holy Spirit, really great people. But I would say the foundation of most of their beliefs was you do stay in it forever. I even had counsel from people who I still love to this day that you pray and you believe that the God of the impossible can change him and can do things, and marriage is a covenant and covenant is forever. And honestly, no one ever counseled me on what to do. They never said stay and they never said leave. It was really a ton of prayer for reconciliation. And I don't have any regrets of the amount of time I stayed because we exercised every avenue of accountability, counseling, therapy in and outside of the church. For me, I needed that process because I very much believed when I encountered God, it was such a strong encounter. I did believe in the God of the impossible and I really hung on to that story of the man that was running naked in the tombs and saying to the Lord, you set that man in his right mind instantly, and just believing scripture is what it is. And you can do that again. So personally, I hung on to that. I had people supporting both of us. But if we interviewed each one of them, when I made my decision, I know I made several of them very uncomfortable and I challenged a lot of their theology. But I will tell you, through coincidence, some people would say, I was listening to worship music on YouTube and I found a sermon from Bill Johnson on the renewing of the mind. And it was in the middle of a lot of abuse and a lot of infidelity. And I just started listening to it. I bought his book, The Renewing of the Mind, and the Holy Spirit just really recalibrated what was God's design and what I was in and the unhealth of it. And that he actually didn't require me to stay in that type of environment to be following him, that I wasn't going to disappoint him. And actually that I believe this, he was putting out his hand as an invitation. Do you trust me? Will you trust me in this hard process? So I'm so grateful that they walked with me and they supported me when I looked at them and said, because I had a leader in front of me when the most recent infidelity was in my face and we were in leadership. So there were some phone calls made and they began to pray for reconciliation. And I looked at them and I stopped them in the middle of the prayer and I said, that's not where I'm at. And I'm so grateful because they looked back at me and said, okay, then we'll walk with you. And they did. I definitely made them uncomfortable. I definitely don't think they had walked other people through that. But they supported me. So kind of a long answer.
No, that was a good answer. I know this is just based on conversations we had and listening to various episodes of your podcast that your journey was a little bit out of the box. And I feel like that's just important for people to hear. And what I love about what you shared is you had a faith that God was big enough to, walk you in this totally different direction, even if it made some other people uncomfortable. And I think that's, for people who encounter this conversation, whether you're a blended family now or you're facing grief and loss like we've all walked through. I think the big thing to remind people is that God is big enough to overcome any circumstance that we're in. If God can bring reconciliation, but if there are other paths that you're walking, and even if it makes people uncomfortable, God's working in those same situations. God's big enough. He's not
Yep.
offended or scared of it. Like he's seen all the craziest things that anybody can ever do. And so I think that's something that I feel like we often miss when we're walking through friends and family through painful situations and life circumstances is God is really big enough to handle it. We sometimes don't give God enough credit of what he can do and how he can redeem. Now it can be a long journey. It can be, 5 years, 10 years. Like you can be
Yeah.
walking a lot of paths before you see like what that next stage is.
Yeah.
But I think I think in whether it's a year or 5 years or whatever, like it's different because we all need different things as we're healing and changing, and God is kind of working things out
Yeah.
within us. Last question related to your story, then we'll finally
Yeah.
let Christian talk. He's just like, I'm so glad I'm here for this conversation.
Yep.
When you look, because on the one hand, like whether it's you get divorced or you lose a spouse to cancer, like Christian and I have both have, like it's lonely and it's
Yeah.
really hard to learn to do life on your own. As you
Yeah.
look back on those 5 years, like what were some of the things that you needed to walk out with God before you would have been even remotely ready to step into being married again?
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot. Um, I realized very quickly, I don't know, I guess when you go through something where your whole world kind of blows up and dies, you start to self-reflect. And I really just started reflecting on, was I a healthy person? What caused me to be in this codependent abusive relationship? I just did a lot of, internal just kind of searching and reflecting. A lot of, Lord, okay, I see the unhealth of what I was in. So show me how I got there. And it almost was like as I was becoming healthy and my mind is getting renewed, I'm realizing how unhealthy I was and that a lot of my beliefs needed to change. So I spent a lot of time, I did lots of counseling by myself, different things. And it was like some inner healing, some through the church, some just with a therapist in town who was a Christian, but a different denomination than me. The Lord kind of orchestrated all of that in great detail, but I realized I had gotten to this place. It wasn't just the person I was married to had all these issues. I had a role and there was a lot of unhealth and a lot of beliefs in me that needed to change. I really wanted to get to a place where I was healthy as a mom. I was healthy as a woman. I knew who I was. I really, in that 5 years, learned the most about my identity in Christ than my early years of salvation. So there was a lot of things I needed that 5 years to really allow the Lord to do in my heart and mind what needed to be done. Childhood, all of that coming from, alcoholics and divorced family. There was a lot there that I didn't even realize. I think I know I lived for a while thinking that stuff didn't affect me. I'm going to have my own children and I'm going to raise them the way I want to. I know what I didn't like, and I'm not going to allow what my parents did or didn't do to affect how I raise my family. And then you realize very quickly it affects the way you raise your children in every way, whether you want it to or not. So I really realized I've got to spend some time getting me the best version of myself and realizing who the Lord says I am.
Well,
So,
Christian, thank you for your patience. And just for context for how we all met, we were at Alan DiDio's Arm Media Conference like a year ago. And that's how we met in the green room. And we just became fast friends, talked a lot about your podcast that you're now doing at that event.
we sure did.
But we
Yeah.
just connected because of our stories and some of the things were so similar. Christian, would love to have you give folks context for your journey before you
Yeah.
met Laura, and also be sure to comment on like how long was it before your wife went home to heaven before you
Yeah.
stepped into being in relationship with Laura and eventually dating.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it was the process kind of started. I was dating my late wife, probably in 18, 19. So we started dating pretty young. We got married after like 5 years of dating, and I was trying to figure out life. I was living in Atlanta, musician, and helping my dad's ministry. And then we got married in 2014. And then a year later, about a year and a half later, in 2016, I had my daughter Adeline. And it was about a year after that that we started dealing with some weird symptoms. Our daughter was one, and my late wife, Bobby Jean, was just like feeling funny. And for a while, we actually thought she was pregnant again, which was kind of what we were thinking, but it wasn't. And so we were going to doctors, and they couldn't figure it out. And they thought it was infections and thought it was a disease. And they just couldn't pinpoint what was wrong with her. And so it was almost a solid year before we even got a remotely like normal diagnosis that we could say, okay, we think we know what's going on. They'd sent us to like infectious disease and all these crazy specialists, and like all of them had tried everything they could think of, and they're like, yeah, there's nothing wrong, but we see that you're dealing with symptoms. And a lot of the symptoms, she would just wake up and feel nauseated and feel weak and almost like anemic, but it wasn't. She wasn't necessarily anemic, and iron wasn't really helping her. So it was really weird kind of stuff. And she would get sick really easily, and then they sent us to an oncologist, and they started running tests, and the only thing they could figure out was her blood wasn't perfect. That was pretty much the gist of it. And they ended up giving us a diagnosis as they did a bone marrow sample, and they basically at the time they were calling it MDS, which is some people call that pre-leukemia. And when we got that, we ended up going to a larger hospital to get it, figured out. And basically, they found out it was turning into leukemia, and within 6 months, she was diagnosed with leukemia. And it happened very quickly at that point. So we're in like 2018 when we first started dealing with it, probably. And by middle of 2018, we had that diagnosis. And by like 2019, we were fighting it and treatments and did all kinds of different things. And we could never get her into remission. We'd get really close because they did have a cure. Well, not a cure, but like a potential cure that was like they called a bone marrow transplant. Essentially, you have to find someone that's a match, and her sister ended up being a match. There's like a 1 in 4 chance. Like there's 25% chance she could be a match, and then they went to do that, but then we could never get her into remission. That's what it took to get that transplant, and it just kind of gradually got worse. And then by 2020, we were going through where we had done all the big treatments, and she couldn't do them again, and she wasn't getting better. And they were like, "Well, look, we have some trial stuff we're going to try, you know, beginning of 2020 in January, and we would like to submit her to that because we think this could potentially knock it out and get her into remission so we could do the treatment." They're really just kind of clinging on to this last thing that the doctor had told us. And then everyone knows, January of 2020, the world got really weird really quickly. And by March, we couldn't get a hold of our doctors anymore. They just went dark. No calls, no returns, no emails, no texts. I mean, we just lost all communication with the major hospitals that we were working with. And we had to kind of just reach out to our local oncologist to kind of try to get support in that way. Um, and she would have moments of good, but it was a lot of roller coaster. And then by June of 2020, kind of really suddenly, she got sick and just couldn't recover and passed away. And it was that was really, we knew I was believing for a miracle the whole time. So it wasn't like it was like I thought this would happen as suddenly as it did. And it was like 2 days ago, we were all good, we were hanging out, and then within 48 hours, she's completely passed away. And it's just like, how did that happen so quickly? It was very quick. And it just took me off guard. I wasn't prepared. I had been believing for a miracle. We had been praying. We'd been doing all the things. And it was just kind of like I got to that place where, like, God, like, what are you doing? Like, I thought I had all these plans and visions. You don't marry someone and think that you're only going to be with them for, 5 years. That doesn't seem like what God would do, And in that, I struggled a lot. And so for the first few months, it was, my daughter was 2.5. She was about to turn 3, or was 3, maybe turning 4. I can't remember, something like that. And so she, doesn't really understand either. And I'm trying to raise her, work, also trying to deal with all this grief that was just overwhelming me at that season. And luckily, I had a really amazing supportive family. My sister I talked to, who's been on our podcast, she was, a sounding board for me early on. I would call her daily, and I don't even know how she dealt with it because probably was pretty depressing. And for her, it was, her sister-in-law that had passed. So it was even heavy for all my family. It wasn't something that was just I was dealing with. It was we had a situation where we came together. I think we were all dealing with a lot of grief and needed to kind of somewhat express it. And I don't know whose idea. It was probably my sister. She was really in tune with this kind of stuff. But we all got together as a family, like my parents, all my siblings, and even my oldest niece and nephew came together, and we just got in a room and we just like just shared our grief and what we are dealing with. And we all just cried together in hell. And it was really weird from the outward perspective, but honestly, one of the most kind of healing things, and kind of just allowed everyone to be okay with where they were. And it was stuff like that that kind of really helped me begin, and really similar to like what Laura said in that season, as soon as she passed, I mean, I immediately began to evaluate, okay, God, um, this isn't at all what I wanted. This isn't all what I prayed for. It's not all what I believed. But I know you're good. And I can't deny that. Because in my mind, it's two options. It's like I'm all in with God at this point, or I'm done. And in my mind, I'm like, I know I've experienced the goodness of God. I know who He is. And I can't forget that. Like I couldn't run from that feeling. I knew who He was. So at that point, I decided, all right, I'm going to be the best dad I can for my daughter. I'm going to deal with whatever's going on in me, which is a lot, and then I'm going to begin to try to even make myself better than I was before. And God just began to reveal things, and I would, you know, work through a lot of emotion. I went to counseling and inner healing, all kinds of different things, because it was a lot. Because and one thing I'm sure you can relate to is you deal with the initial grief of losing your wife, but then there's a second round that comes shortly after, and it's the grief of all the trauma you dealt with during the cancer, which is almost as heavy as the actual loss once you begin to deal with it, and some stuff begin to surface. And I had realized that I almost went 2 years without dealing with any of the trauma I had walked through watching her go through, and trying to just be a very strong and supportive husband that was there for her and could, so I just pushed a lot of that emotion down that I was dealing with to just be a strong support for her because I knew she needed that. And when you start to deal with that, that's like a whole nother layer that was just like, whew, it's heavy. So kind of fast forward through a lot of that dealing with the grief. I ended up kind of getting to a place where I was kind of just extremely overwhelmed with my life circumstances, with working, trying to raise my daughter. All of a sudden, my daughter was growing, and I realized none of her clothes fit. I mean, it was just like a crazy, everything was hitting at once, and I felt so overwhelmed by all my circumstances. And I couldn't keep up with laundry and trying to cook and prepare her food and get her here, get her there. And I was just like, how do people do this? Like, I, I didn't realize how much my late wife had done for me. And then now I'm doing it all. And it's just like, this is too much. And maybe that sounds crazy, but for me, it was just too much. And I'm telling my sister all this stuff, and she's just like, her eyes, I can just, just like, I don't know what to say to my brother. He's dealing with way too much, and I can't even imagine. So she's like, hey, I have this friend. You need to meet her. She's raising 4 boys on her own. She hasn't had any help. She's working full time. She's at church. She's connected. She's solid. You need to ask her these questions. So I'm like, that's kind of weird. I don't want to meet some random person and just like ask them for help. Like that just seems so weird. And eventually after 2 weeks, I hit a wall and I'm like, all right, what's this chick's number? I'm gonna call her because I need some help. So I call her, and I guess she had already asked her and said, hey, look, would you talk to my brother? And I'm assuming you said
Yeah. So his sister Victoria was a really good friend. I actually was on the phone with her. She was in an airport traveling when she lost her sister-in-law, Bobby Jean. And because I was close with Victoria, I knew what Christian was walking from an outsider's perspective, didn't know them, didn't know Christian, didn't know his wife. But because Victoria was my friend, I walked her through a lot of her grief. So had prayed a ton for them, different things. And so she, would talk to me different times we'd spend time together just about how overwhelmed and worried she was about Christian. And so when she asked me if I would talk to him to encourage him, for one thing, she was my children's pastor. She walked my boys through grief. I mean, we had such a friendship that it was like, absolutely. But then there was also this thing inside of me of I had been in a really long, I was doing, the Lord's providing, I'm doing okay, but I'm exhausted. Physically, mentally, spiritually. You don't know if the season's going to change, and also just feeling like I'm doing it, and everybody might say we're doing well, but it was a moment to moment. I really don't know what I'm doing. God, you got to show up. So I knew that I was supposed to, like, it was the Lord asking me to encourage him, but I do remember him sending a text asking, if we could get together and just talk. I talked to some of my closer friends that are a little bit older than me that give me a lot of advice, and I was like, "What do y'all think about this?" Um, and all of them were like, "Wow, feels like God's asking you to do something." So, I just out loud in my car, I told the Lord if he wanted me to encourage Christian, I was really tired, really honest with the Lord, you know where I'm at. You're gonna have to speak through me because I don't know how much I have to give.
Yeah.
So
And just I at this point, I was looking for very practical, actually. Like I had a sheet of paper and I was very detailed and like probably 10, 20 things that I just like, how do you do these things? So I was thinking like, she's clearly got it all working and seems put together. So like clearly she's going to be able to answer these because no one else can. It seems crazy, but I went for such like, it was so practical for me.
mhm.
But then what I actually got it was very practical, but not, it was so much more spiritual. Which was almost just like, take this book and throw it out the window. And so, yeah, so she ended up coming, we ended up meeting. And I remember the first question I asked her, I was something like, how do you decide when you get home if you're going to cook or go get food or like do laundry and like spend time or like when, like, how do you plan out your week? Like, how do you know what days you're doing things? And because for me, I was looking for a system that I could start to do some routine because I felt like I had no routine and I wanted routine. I used to have it. And she kind of just looked at me and smiled and said, I just see if there's peace and then I follow the peace. And I'm like,
He was so aggravated with me.
yeah, that was not what I wanted at all. That was not, I was like, what peace? Like, what is that? I don't know what peace is right now. And so I kind of moved on, just thinking, okay, that was a weird answer. And then I asked her another question. It was like the same answer.
I think it was like you were asking if Adeline, like how you decide what school to send her to
Yeah,
or
there was
different.
so much I was trying to, because she was getting to where like preschool, I needed to get her in something or daycare, and like, what do you do? And like, what have you done?
Yeah.
What research? And like, it was just such practical. And some of it, she gave me some,
Mhm.
this is what I did, but it may not work for you. You need to follow the peace. And I'm like, follow the peace. And the weird thing is, I grew up in church. My dad was a youth pastor for 17 years and then started doing evangelism. He still does evangelism. I've worked at churches as a worship pastor, AV director, all the different things. So for me, it was just like, so I knew all the Holy Spirit. I knew how to follow his peace, but I had forgotten in that process of crazy season in life and kind of just forgot the basics of what I'd always done. And hearing her kind of reinforce that's really all it was for her was she was just following the leading of the Holy Spirit daily. And it was almost just like a wake up call, like, oh man, what am I doing? Like I I should be doing this. And it took me a minute to get there. Because I can be so, you know, A-type personality and want things a certain way that I can kind of miss out on what the Lord wants to do and just disregard it. And she kind of just helped realign some things. And we ended up telling our story.
Yeah.
Each other's like I told her my story, she told me her story, which was really vulnerable and weird because we both got emotional and I didn't
And we didn't know each
get
other.
to know her. So that's like also like weird
Yeah.
to cry in front of someone you just met. It
Yeah.
was a very strange night. And then like when you leave, you're like, thanks for coming. And it's like this is weird. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. So it was a very interesting night, but the Lord was doing something in both of us, and we knew we wanted to stay connected because we felt like for the first time
Yeah.
someone understood me and what I was going through, even though our situations are different. The grief and what we were walking through were so similar in season
Yeah.
that I could say something, it's like she could finish my sentence because
Mhm.
she exactly had felt that or had said that out of her mouth. And it was almost funny. It got like almost a
Mhm.
joke that, oh my gosh, she just said exactly what I just said, or like whatever. So
For me, just having so many close friends, amazing supportive people, it was the first time in 5 years I looked somebody in the eye and you felt like, you got people who they'll look at you and they're like, they're really listening, they have empathy, they have all the things, but this was like, "Oh, he gets it." Like, he understands what I'm saying. I don't have to describe anymore. That was a really wild experience to just have a physical person looking at you to say, I know what you're walking through. And we had prayed a lot of the same prayers. It seemed like he was 6 months removed from losing his wife. I was 5 years removed from my divorce, but it seemed like we were in really similar seasons when we began to talk.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people are surprised by, how much, whether it's a divorce or a death of a spouse, how much it's that loss of the dream and the
Yeah.
possibility and the life that you built. And like you were saying earlier, Christian, like nobody plans to be married for 4 or 5 years. Like you have this whole life planned out, regardless of circumstances. And I think that's really struck me too. How much, whether it's people who've lost somebody to cancer or pick the thing, and folks who have walked through a divorce, just that the grieving, the emotions, the difficulties of starting over, how similar those journeys have been. Christian, you had mentioned just, there's different seasons of grief, and just the overwhelm and dealing with the trauma. Like how long did that, like how long was that process for you? Because I know for me, like walking through kind of that first 6 months of grief, you have such a burden lifted off of you. Like you get to a place where you're like, man, I'm pretty good, and I feel like this and this. And they, hi Titus, do you want to wave since you popped in?
Hey, bud.
Hey.
He can't hear you,
Yes,
but
hi. Oh, yeah.
I'm just finishing the podcast. But come by. We'll go out for lunch as soon as I'm done. Okay. I'll leave that in there just for fun because it rarely happens.
I mean,
He's adorable.
yeah.
When he was, I think, 2, he ran through my office semi naked once because
Of
my
course.
the context of where my office was in our old house to the bathroom was sometimes
real
he'd
close.
pop in to say hi. So
That's
so
amazing.
at least he had, full clothes on this time. I appreciate that. But back to my question. In
Yeah.
terms of like, I think this was one thing that surprised me, like that kind of that second grief where you don't realize, and I'm walking through that to some degree still now, of you don't realize how, a couple years of just constant trauma sort of destroys you. Like
Yeah.
there's this relief when you're not responsible for all the things initially, where it's like, okay, there's this big weight lifted. But I think spiritually, health wise, emotionally, all these things, you don't realize the toll it took on your everything. And
Yeah.
so like how, like when like what part of your season was that, walking that part of it out?
Yeah, so surprisingly, it was kind of earlier. I don't know. I mean, I know everybody handles grief and the timelines can be all over the place. And I mean, I can't even say I'm not still dealing with it to this day. It's probably something that I will carry for the rest of my life. There's always going to be a love for her that it's there. You don't just heal from that, you know? But at the same time, you learn how to walk it out and it becomes less of a kind of traumatizing sting or this thing that kind of like stops you in your shoes and you sit there and deal with it. But it comes kind of in waves, and we both talk about it because we both deal with different types of grief. And sometimes it's, she'll be like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I don't know what's going on," and then you realize it's like, "Oh, something's happening," you know. Or of course, too, when you got kids, add that to the mix. They're asking questions. You know, they want to know why mommy's in heaven or where's dad and what happened, and or Adeline's asking. Her brother's like, "Hey, why don't you ever talk about your dad?" You know, and it's just like these are things that can just happen every day at lunch, and you're trying to navigate, and that what that can even make you feel like it's healthy for them to be able to express that. But to get back to me and that, about 3 months in, I had went to it was a very I think I explained some of this to you at that conference, but I'd went to this widowers retreat. Sounds really strange to say out loud, but it was I didn't even know what a was. I've heard of widows, but you don't hear like what guys are called. I don't know if that was just my ignorance or what, but like when someone said a widower, I was like, "Is that what I am?" And I was really confused by it. I'm like, and then I googled it and found out that was a thing. So this guy was doing it for the first time. He was from kind of around the area, and he had went to school with a pastor that I work with, and he's like, "Look, we want to pay your way to go on this like retreat." And I was like, "What is the retreat?" And he's like, I'm not really sure. He wants to talk to you. Would you want to talk to him?" I was real standoffish because it was pretty early on for me still. I was still dealing with a lot of grief. And I'm just in my mind thinking a bunch of guys that lost their wives are going to a retreat. That sounds weird. And I just like no guys just want to get super emotional, you know.
Especially with strangers, people you've never met before. Like
There yeah.
that's a almost a bridge too far.
Yes, correct. So everything in me is just like, no way. That sounds terrible. And then eventually you know, my he was a really close friend of mine, but he was also the pastor of the church. And he's like, look, would you just take a phone call from the guy? And I'm like, all right. So I take this phone call and I'm actually going to a dinner with friends and I'm just thinking I'm going to have a quick call. I'm like driving and the dude calls me and I pull up to the restaurant and I'm thinking I'm going to, wrap this up real quick and tell him I'm not going to go. I just already had it in my mind. And this guy starts to tell me he asked me, he's like, would you just share real quickly your story? And I'm like, I'd realize I didn't even know how to tell my story because I don't think I'd ever said it. So I'm probably in the parking lot for 20 minutes. And then I realize I'm so emotional. I can't keep it together. I feel like a weirdo that just cried on the phone to some dude that's wanting me to come to his retreat. Now he really thinks I need help. Like I'm thinking I'm like not doing a good job telling this guy no. And he begins to like share. And for one, he was extremely supportive. And then also he tells me his story. And even though it was different, he lost his wife to cancer. They were married about the same amount of time. He had a daughter the same exact age. Like it was so many things that aligned with my story that gave me chill bumps. It gave him chill bumps to hear me because he felt like I was telling his story. And when he said that, and then he told me his, I did the same thing. I'm like, this is weird. So there was almost like an instant connection. And then I couldn't get myself to say no. I'm like, all right, I'll come. Then I'm like, why did I just do? I told myself I wasn't. And so I go to this thing, kind of fast forward because I could probably be on this way too long. But I get on this widow's retreat and it's super awkward right off the bat. I mean, you already know, all right, I'm going to keep it to myself. Any guy that comes up and talks to me, it's just going to be real surface. I just want to eat lunch. I just got here. We're in this big cabin in like South Carolina in the middle of nowhere. I don't even think I had cell phone signal. And um, this guy kind of walks up to me and just says, hey, and he's like, "What's your name?" And I told him, and he definitely wasn't from the South. He was like from somewhere up north because his accent was different. And I'm like trying to I feel so anxious. You just feel this is weird. Like I know this dude's lost his wife and he's 2 inches from me, and I don't know what to say. He's like, you don't want him to feel emotional. I don't want to feel emotional. There's everything going against you in that. And he just looks at me dead in my eyes and says, "So tell me about your bride." And I didn't know I'd shoved so much down for the last 3 months of trauma and what I was going with, and I just didn't feel safe. You didn't just wanna share how you felt with everyone you were around. You felt like everyone around you felt weird that you felt this way, and then they felt all this, burden for you, but it felt weird because they didn't know how to talk to you, so it was like your whole for 3 months of grieving feels like you're avoiding what is you're dealing with around people. And for the first time, I'm in a room with someone who I know asked me a question and genuinely wanted me to say how I felt, which didn't know. And I couldn't even get a word out of my mouth before I just started bawling. And he just grabbed me and held me, which was weird. But I actually felt good. Like it was the weirdest thing ever. And he just held me and he's like, I know, man. And then he started crying. It was just like this weird moment of like, okay, there's a lot going on right now. And I think that was probably the most crying I've ever done in 3 days of my entire life. It was a 3-day retreat. We cried all day, every day. It was like good. It was good, bad tears, ugly tears, grieving tears, tears for compassion. But you get really close to people when you cry with them and you get vulnerable. And all these men had completely different stories, but they all had one thing that was similar, and it was that they had lost their wives that they loved and didn't want to. And they were navigating that, and we all were. And none of us had figured it out. None of us had mastered it. I thought I was going to get this thing and learn a few things. Like I told myself, all right, these guys, I'm a lot smarter. Like they've probably grieved really terribly. I'm going to learn what not to do. I'm going to take that home and I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to be great. And I got in there and realized this is not at all how this works. And then, like you said, the question was, which I'm getting there.
I was going to remind him of the question.
that's when I started, after I dealt with my initial grief then, which was kind of early on, like 3 months, I really started dealing with stuff, and then he started bringing up stuff about trauma. One of the guy's wives were murdered, and it was really gruesome hearing the story, and I'm just like, "Wow, I can't even fathom, like, how did you even get through that?" Like, forget losing your wife, but then the vulnerable and knowing that something was your wife was attacked and all these things, it's like so heavy. And I'm like, and he talked about the trauma, and then it hit me in that moment, and I just started remembering all the times I was in the hospital, all the times I watched procedures and hated it and felt all the pain, but I didn't know what to do with it, and all these things kind of just surfaced, and I'm like, oh, whoa, there's something going on, and I started having dreams of being in the hospital and all these things. It was just all this trauma because we had spent, I did the math at one point from like 2019 or maybe 2000, the middle of 2018 to like 2019, getting into January of 2020. We'd spent over 194 days in the hospital. And a lot of that, I couldn't even be there with her because when COVID started coming, they were just like, nope. So the only communication, I may not see my wife for 10 days straight outside of a Zoom call if she was up for it. And it was just really just a lot of pain and a lot of things I had to deal with. But because I think I dealt with my initial grief head on so quickly and didn't really suppress it, and I found a way to express it. And I used music a lot as well. Was able to write songs and do things, and that was kind of a form of expression. It kind of made it to where I think I started to deal with the trauma where those things started to come up because I had kind of made space. One of the guys on the trip, he kind of talked about how grief hits you. It's like you have this, swimming pool's worth of grief above your head, but your brain's only able to process like a straw's amount at a time. So imagine how long that would take to drain a pool with a straw. Like it would take forever. And it's kind of like that with grief to get to where you go through the phases and the steps of it. It's almost like you had to have expressed and processed a good bit before you start realizing how much is actually there in the layers of it. And I started to kind of tackle the layers really unintentionally. I just wanted to be a good father for my daughter. I wanted to beat it. I didn't know if that's even a way to put it, but that's where I was. I hated how almost debilitating it was. Like it just kind of froze you where you were and you felt you couldn't move on. And for me, it was like I wanted to get healthier, I wanted to get better, and I wanted to be able to kind of move on with my life, not have love for my wife. It has nothing to do with that, but more just like the place of being frozen and fear and hurt and pain and suffering. And I knew I needed to work those things out. So it was just a matter of time that those things were going to work itself out. And then, then you start dealing with new things.
But I think, and it's just awkward because you're trying to figure yourself out. You don't
Yep.
know because whether we're talking my story or either one of your stories, on the other side of it, like you're this completely different person. Like you relate to everyone differently. Your journey with God is different. Like so there, you're not at all the same person, and I think that's awkward. For people on the outside, like I
Mm.
not surprised, but just like how all of our relationships are different after the loss of a spouse or after a divorce. Like your friend groups change. There are people you'll
Yeah.
never ever see again because
Completely.
they're
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Like it's just so
Yeah.
whether it's that we've changed or all of those around us have changed. Like nothing's ever the same. So it's just a very long journey to figure that out. And I think too, like the one of the things people will realize if you're reflective, like all throughout walking through a terminal illness, all people ever ask you is like, how is she doing? And like that's the only thing people want to talk about. And then after they're
Yeah.
gone, people will ask cursory kind of questions, but not that they don't really care, but like unlike the guy at the retreat, like he really wanted you to talk and to share,
Yeah.
or the guy on the phone. Like most people are just being nice because they're just awkward and they don't know what to
Yeah.
do or what to
Yeah.
say. And if you would break down and go just kind of pour your heart out, most people are like, "Whoa, that
That's too much. Yeah.
that was way too much." So like it can be, I feel like it can be really hard just finding an outlet of where to share or
Yeah.
have like most of my friends are pastors and leaders just because of my job in Christian publishing. So like I had 4 or 5 people I could call constantly. I would just get in my car and drive and get on the phone with one of them almost every day just to talk so I could stay sane before and after. And so
Yeah.
just finding those outlets, like it's really,
Yep.
if you don't have that kind of support, I don't know how you get to the other side of this. And it sounds like each of us have had decent amounts of support and just good people around us to help us get to the other side or where we're at now in our journeys. The guy you mentioned from the retreat, that's Davy Blackburn, just gonna throw out his book, Nothing is Wasted, is
Yeah.
Yeah.
fantastic. What's really intriguing, audiobook's really good. They intersperse his wife's journal pages throughout the book, and so you get a sense of like she's almost speaking into her life because he's telling their backstory and everything that happened also before she was murdered. And so
Wow.
just a really different kind of a grief book. But I had interviewed him a while back, and we just, in the same way that I connected with you guys in your story, like Davey and I just connected, like we just
Yeah.
understood each other. So there aren't a lot of grief books in the market that speak to men at all, and so Davies is probably one of the few. So I'll link to that in the show notes, but
Yeah.
would highly recommend that. In terms of Victoria introducing you guys, like, was it even? I'm sure people ask you this, like,
Mhm.
was there even an inkling of her thinking you two would get together, or was this just an innocent? My brother needs help. You seem to have some things figured out because some people said
Yeah.
like clearly she was trying to fix you guys up, but I don't think that was the case, was it?
No, not at all. She, this is funny, just her personality. She now takes credit for setting us up and says that that was the Holy Spirit and she was following him. But we know God had a bigger plan, but no, for all of us, not at all. It really was, I love Victoria, so I'm going to do this for her. And he really wanted help. I don't think any of us had any idea at all.
Yeah, and even early on, like she would joke, like, because we would kind of spend time together after that. Like we hung out a few times, and it was like a few weeks later or something, and she would text me and be like, "Oh, I heard you were hanging out with Laura," and she'd make these little jokes. But then once she realized that there was maybe some interest between us, she got kind of got serious with me. It was like she was very defensive over
My
Laura
boys.
and the boys because she had invested so much. She was just like, "Look, you better be serious. Like they've been through a lot. You don't need to toy around unless you're serious and like all this stuff." And she kind of, I mean, it was good that she said that. It was I needed to hear that, but I knew that she didn't plan it because how she acted pretty soon after we started to talk some. So
Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to completely unpack everything because obviously people can go back and listen to all the episodes of your podcast so
yes,
far where you share so much of your story way more in depth than we're able to
yeah,
go into in this conversation. I think next I'd love to have you just comment on getting to the place like when you decide like, man, this is a thing, maybe we should get married and all that. Like you have to get to this place where you're confident with what you're hearing from God. You're confident with the counsel of like your core people who you trust, but you also have to shut off other people who are dissenters. Cause as I'm sure you both know, cause I certainly had this in my world. And like, I'll just share Nicole's and my story quick. So, I had prayed for like, gosh, the whole time Lynette was sick, I'd had this dream back way before, like 6 or 7 years before she got sick, of asking my kids about getting remarried, and it was just weird because I'm not this prophetic dreamer. And in the dream, I know Lynette's in heaven. I'm talking to my kids, and I see somebody kind of with blondish hair off in the distance, and that was the whole context of the dream. And I was like, well, that was really really strange. And
Wow.
so, fast forward, 6, 7 years, whatever it was. And once we get this terminal diagnosis, I'm like, man, I had a dream like 6, 7 years ago of Lynette being in heaven. And I was like, well, that's certainly strange. Like I'd never told anybody about it. It was just something I wrote in my journal. And, like you, Christian, always believing for healing, praying for healing, all the things. I prayed in two directions throughout the whole journey, primarily always seeking out healing and believing that that was going to be our journey, that we were going to be the one that got to the other side of this horrible illness, but also praying like, if it's truly, my wife's time to go home to heaven, then Lord, start working in my heart now for the person I need to be, the person that you hopefully bring into our lives in the future, and all of that. And so I got to this place fairly early where I told the Lord, is like, man, 6 to 9 months is all I want to be single. Like after
yeah,
walking out a 2 year terminal diagnosis, because you grieve all along, as I'm sure you saw in your journey. The whole journey is this grief. Like once you get that terminal diagnosis, nothing's normal about your marriage anymore. Like it's just all about the sickness. But in our case, like we got introduced through a trusted pastor friend of both of ours, and we just clicked, and it made sense and all the things, and it was really fast. But I had dissenting people speaking into my life who were like, you're this terrible person. Your wife's barely cold in the ground. What's wrong with you? And
Yeah.
I think no matter what, like whether we're talking 5 years from a divorce or 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it is from a spouse dying, there are those a little bit outside of your circle who will always be uncomfortable because they're still grieving, or it's not the timing they would choose,
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
the things. And so it's weird because in the context of grieving and supporting a spouse who's dying and terminally ill, you're a rock star and everybody loves you and you get lots of kudos. But on the other side of it, when you're looking at getting remarried, the
Yeah.
tables turn, and those same people who are your biggest supporters,
Yeah.
some of them are just rude and mean.
Mm.
So I'd love to hear just a little bit as you guys, as your relationship matured and you're like, man, this is a thing, we should get married. How
Mhm.
did you choose like who to listen to and who to kind of block out? Because everybody's got both of those people when you step into that part of the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Genius.
Um, we we knew really quickly. It was kind of weird. It was almost the whole time we joked like maybe we're dating in dog years, and this is like we felt like we knew each other a lot longer than we actually did. I think part of that is just once you've been married and you have children, you skip the surface, getting to know each other. You go really deep. If you are even entertaining the fact of dating someone,
Yeah.
you really just dive into if we're going to talk this way, it would only be for the purpose of marriage. So I don't know. We just went really deep, really quick. Part of that was connecting. Part of that was we're not trying to date and play games. We've got children involved and our hearts are still very vulnerable and tender. So we went fast pretty quick. We also had this crazy God peace. I don't know. It sounds super spiritual, but a knowing. And then just began talking about what would our life look like together. We only brought in a couple 3 people. I think 3 people knew we were dating seriously for
like the first month. We were really quiet because we wanted to.
yeah.
We were really intentional to honor our children. It's a lot when if you were to make it public too early and it doesn't work out, and even just people walking up to your kids and say something, and we really wanted to be sensitive to them, so we really wanted to make sure that we knew this was a God thing, and it would develop toward marriage, or we really felt that way before we even said anything publicly or even introduced the kids to one another.
Yeah.
I didn't even really meet her kids till way later because we wanted to honor it, for it to be about us, and then if that's
Know that we
right,
know.
that we know, and if that's right, then phase 2 is let's introduce our families and see what happens. And
We also had, even though we didn't personally know each other, he grew up, oddly enough, in the church I was attending. So his entire family was there. His dad was actually an elder in one season in that church that I'm now attending. He's not working there. So our circles and pastoral oversight was very similar. So everybody knew everyone. And a big part of it, too, was honoring, his late wife's family, and they're still grieving. So we didn't want to talk about things that we wanted to know what was happening before we introduced that, where there was a chance they would find out or our other family members or friends. So kept it close for a while. I think once we met each other's kids, felt really great and confident in that.
and then we went to
I think we protected ourselves from a lot of naysayers by the way we walked it. So we didn't get any feedback for a little while because no one knew. We even went on dates in other towns because we just didn't want to be out in our town and people talk. And then once we let our children in and our families in, we still were protected in a sense because I don't know, maybe we just did this. I don't think we did this because we knew to do this. We just did it because we didn't have much capacity. There was so much happening and so much changing. We very quickly realized, you talk about your friend circle changing. Our friend circle became very small. who we did life with was really small because we had the dynamic of him trying to get to know my boys. I'm trying to get to know his daughter. We're both working. There was so much happening. We didn't have a ton of time to be around outsiders. And then we talked a lot. I probably needed a ton more affirmation, and crumbled under the criticism and the eyes of judgment, more than he did. He kind of just seemed to let it roll off his back. I don't know. Do you want to speak to that? Because I feel like
Yeah,
it
I think
affected me.
a lot of it really was that, like, in the process, maybe this is just a guy girl thing, but like I didn't feel as much judgment as what she probably experienced. I think I had a lot more people protective over me in my situation than they had really for her, which kind of made it a little bit more complicated because of the fact that like I'm not even noticing it as much, and then she's like telling me like, "Did you see how that girl looked at me?" Or like, and I'm like, "Oh,
I know what they're thinking.
I know what they're thinking." I'm like, "Are you sure?" Like, I didn't think that was weird. And she's like, "No, they're judging me." And you're just like, "Okay." And maybe that's true. Maybe I'm like oblivious, which could be possible. So a lot of that we would have to kind of work out. But it was weird because maybe she felt more of it because people felt really protective over me and my grief, and they knew Bobby Jean, but they don't know her, and they don't know if they trust her.
Yeah.
So there was this season of like, you're really trying to earn people's trust, which you shouldn't have to, but like you do.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit weird. And there were definitely situations that kind of got a little tense or felt weird.
Yeah, and we even had, we have a couple that we're extremely close friends with. It's oddly enough, he was close to them with his wife. I was close to them with my spouse. And so now we're together and we've had conversations. The wife had a really hard time with this, and it caused so much pain for me. But after a little bit of time of being married, sitting down and having a conversation with her and her expressing to me, I was still grieving. I was still dealing with so much grief. It really opened my eyes and softened my heart to, wow, this had nothing to do with me. This had to do with her processing and dealing with her own grief of losing a friend.
And that's something you just navigate. I mean, there's not really,
Yeah.
sadly, an easy way, and everyone's going to handle it differently. And even with family, I mean, we're talking about
Yeah.
friends, but man, family, it gets even more complicated because somebody may have not dealt with their grief at all, but they just stay always on the fence and
Walled
always
up.
offended, always seem turned off toward your life now, or less invested than they used to be. And you're kind of offended back. It's like, man, we were close and now we're not. And it's weird. And you're realizing it, like she said, it's probably just they've never dealt with their grief, or they haven't gotten past something. So they don't know how to accept this now. And that's really what you're doing is you're really asking people to trust you and accept what God's doing. And if they choose not to because of maybe their own grief or their own reasoning, then things just get kind of weird.
And just releasing them and knowing who's a part of your life and your season now and being okay with that.
Yeah.
We had to talk and keep the communication open so much. As long as we were talking and encouraging each other, we navigated it. But it was times that I held things in and didn't express that's when it got really messy.
Yeah. But to move forward, like we really did I mean, we definitely followed the piece the entire time, with dating and then introducing the kids and then even seeking counsel from, our pastor. And then we went to some of her close friends that
Yeah.
they're like family. And, she's been a very strong voice to Laura's life. And she's like, "Hey, I want you to go meet with her." And I'm like, "Okay." And luckily I knew her sons and growing up with them. And so I had somewhat of a relationship with her, but not as close as Laura by any means. So, I was willing to sit down, and these people could ask me questions because I'm thinking maybe I'm healthy, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm crazy. And they're going to help me know if I am. So some of it was just a sounding board because if you are in the middle of grief and you are in a relationship, sometimes I think it's extremely wise to go to those people that you do trust their voice in your life. You do trust their influence in your life, and you receive that from them. It's important that it's those people and not just any random person, or just and really allow them to evaluate some things with you or ask you tough questions. And if you can't answer, maybe you need to take a step back and look. And what was wild for us is that every question that was asked, it was almost like we had already talked about it.
Yep.
I don't think we ever got caught off guard, which really just kind of almost scared both of us in a way because we felt like we were in a like fairy tale world. Like
It was too easy, and it just you just synced up, and you're like, this has to be impossible.
correct.
Yeah.
And we're like,
we have to be missing something.
there's red flags. I know it. There's got to be. And we couldn't find any, and no one could find any when we would meet with them. And we're like, okay, I know you're good, God, but this is like next level. Like you can't be that good. Oh, like this can't be that good. There's something. There's a hidden something, you know. And it wasn't. And even our kids, like we talk about this all the time. There was such a grace on them that there was such an instant bonding and instant. There was no judgment. There was no mean. It just clicked, and it was like, how is that possible? You know. And
But I will say that doesn't mean during that you put us all in a house and then the teenager won't get out of bed or you want him to do a chore.
look,
We definitely walk through all that kind of stuff.
normal parenting still happens, but I'm
Yeah,
I'm talking about
kids
their
are kids.
relation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their relationships to one another. They had this
Yeah.
love almost instantly for one another and care.
Yeah.
And that's something that normally I kind of felt like it would take some time for Adeline to trust Laura or Adeline to trust her brothers. You know, she just went from a single child to 4 brothers and they're all older than her. Like that's a lot. And then vice versa. To being, you know, in a house full of boys that are wrestling and crazy and is a different environment to now have this little princess dog, you know, sister
Who's making him dress up?
and making them dress up and want to play dolls. Like that's a different world, you know. She doesn't want to wrestle. She doesn't want to do loud, crazy things. She wants to do her own thing, you know. And it just seeing them all adapt to that and have this care. Like Adeline would go play Legos with her brothers, and they would want to do things with her and play dress up and do imaginary things. And it's just like we just didn't ask for it to happen. It just happened, and it was just so cool to see that, and that God's grace and love was on all of it. And it just it gave us so much peace and trust that okay, we are following the peace of the Lord. We do know that this is right. So we just began to kind of plan from there.
I don't know if this is my personality type or what, but I had a boldness in the middle of it of I just was at a place where I'm going to trust my gut and not other people.
Yeah.
I had to make a lot of hard decisions, and I had walked that few years alone making hard decisions to even my closest friends. Some of it they were a little worried about. And I just grew this confidence in what the Lord was saying to me, what was right for me and my kids. And I got real confident in that.
Yeah.
So I think it protected me. I know it protected me from it enabled me to walk with people who didn't agree with what we were doing just because I had just settled in myself. I knew what the Lord was saying to me and I knew what he was saying for my children. And at the end of the day, I needed to be okay with that. And I just became confident in that.
And I think one thing that's important, and I know you could probably relate to this, but you get to a place where it's like, you deserve to be happy. You don't have to wallow around in grief, and that's not what the Lord wants for you. You know, we struggled with redemption for a long time because, and we talk about this a lot in our podcast, because it feels second best when you say it sometimes. And, you know, I don't believe that now, but I mean, at the moment of grief, when someone says, oh, the Lord's going to redeem this and you're going to have this great, and you're like, that's not what I want to hear.
I didn't ask for that.
I didn't ask for
This isn't what we prayed for. You know,
Yeah.
like there's always
Right.
that, like, you know, and not that, you know, a second marriage isn't great, but you're like,
Yeah.
this wasn't the plan. Like this
Yeah.
is amazing and it's something new, but if I could go back and still get that first prayer answered, I would still choose that, you know,
Yeah.
like
Right.
I don't feel like that ever leaves us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we walked that out and we talked a lot about it because I mean, for her, she didn't want a divorce either. She
Right.
wanted redemption. She wanted that to be reconciled and worked out. And we both kind of ended up in this place, in this pit. And we talked about that a lot, you know. Early on, one of the heavier things that I needed to hear from her and was afraid to even say it to her really early on was one of the things I told her was, I feel like I'm in a pit of grief and I don't want you to pull me out of it. I want you to jump in there with me. And that's a lot to say to someone that's already got their own stuff. But that's just where I was. And I knew I'm not going to fake it and make this work. So I need you to realize I am here in this just emotional pit of grief. And I'm asking, are you okay with jumping in there? Because that's what it's going to be like for me right now. And I didn't even know the end date to that. And which I do believe this was the Holy Spirit too, because there's no other way I think someone can knowingly walk through that with somebody, with all the stuff she's already walked and carried, and she did, and she was very supportive, and, we did go through times where we had to probably process things even outside of just me and her. I
For
think that's
sure.
healthy. I don't think we load too much on each other. I think that you have to know your balance. You have to communicate that, because if I overload her, she's already got a lot going on, then I'm just going to create unnecessary stress with maybe I don't need to process everything with my wife. Maybe I need to go to counseling. Maybe I need to go to inner healing. Maybe I need to write music. Maybe I need some time alone. I do think there's a balance, and we had to learn that
Yeah.
early on in
Yeah.
marriage. We realized we were kind of putting a little bit too much, where it was really good for us at the beginning for that trust and that depth, but then we had to learn a balance as we went.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I really liked what you said about keeping your friend groups appropriately small if that's what you need to do.
Hmm.
Like I kind of just went radio silent on like 3/4 of my everybody for 6 months, like while Nicole and I were dating and just walking that season out because I couldn't handle, not that I had a ton of dissenters, but like I just didn't need those people trying to speak into my life. And it feels weird because sometimes
Yeah.
these are people, whether it's somebody, friends or people in your spouse's family, like you've done life with these people for, like in my case, almost 30 years.
yeah.
Mhm.
And those are the people who said some of the harshest, hardest things to me where I had to be like, I'm sorry
Yeah.
that you don't agree with this, but this isn't your life. Like, and
That's
again,
it.
as I look back now, I know it's just their grief
Yep.
and where they were at, and they weren't ready for it. But even if it's people who've been in your family for multiple decades, like
Hmm.
you have to make a hard choice and be willing to be like, I still got to walk out the path that I know God has me on, and that's difficult because we love those people, and
Right.
and you want to please them and make them happy, but at the same time, like people they ask for too much, and
Yes. Yes.
you have to have your own place of confidence. Like I know what we're hearing from God. I know what we're hearing from the people that we trust who are speaking into this, and I feel like that's a confidence you have to learn of like, well, as this new couple, this family that's emerging, we have to build our own path regardless of what some other people are saying because you'll
Right.
never be able to please everyone. Like everybody
Right.
always has their ideas. I want to jump now just into kind of the journey because I know we're going long, so I don't want to talk for 5 hours here. Um, if people want to hear about some of their parenting and step
Yeah.
parenting and all the journeys, they get into all that on the podcast. It's worth
That's right.
just listening through from episode 1 and go all the way forward. But in terms of like we met again, as we said earlier, at our media conference last year, and you guys were thinking about a podcast or potentially, and so we spent a lot of time talking about that this weekend or that weekend. Um, I'd love to hear kind of the why of even thinking about trying to share in this format, which is very vulnerable, just putting these stories out there. Why did you think you were in a place in your journey where you're like, we have some wisdom we could share at this point, because some people say, well, that's awful cocky that you're going to just come out like you know everything. So, but you were very passionate and like confident about it when I met you, where it's like, okay. And also I think for me, being where I was in my journey and hearing where you were in your journey, I was like, man, you guys have tons of like, you have all the answers for the things I'm questioning.
Oh
Surely you
no.
you have something to say. Like just the why of that, because it's as we talked about before the interview, that's a super vulnerable thing to step out
Yeah.
with a show like this and really just air all your laundry and say, this is where we failed, this is where we've been successful, this is where God is. Here's what we've learned, and you hope it helps somebody, but it's a lot to get to this place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll start
Yeah.
because I called Christian and said we're going to start a podcast. I'm trying to think. Did we? I think we had this idea in our mind for probably a year before we even met Sean.
Yeah. It was
Um,
something we had talked about for sure.
yeah, yeah. But I love that that was your perception because we're still working out the confidence. um, no, I love podcasts and listen to a ton of podcasts. And our first year of marriage was amazing, but it was also very hard. It was next level challenges that I was almost dumbfounded because I felt like I'd gotten really healthy. And then I'm like, why is this marriage so hard? And it was really the dynamics of all of the heavy things we were walking through. So I'm looking for podcasts.
Right.
And I hated
Can I
the
pause you for a second, Laura? Like, as
yeah.
a guy who's in a first year of a remarriage, just for people who are thinking about going this path, you don't realize all the things having this new spouse that because you know how to do life with the person you had, so to speak. And I
Yeah.
feel like there can be a tendency to view each other through the lenses of your previous spouse, your previous marriage. And like you have to really work hard to stay in a space of like, oh, this is something completely new. And I can't just let that old tape play because this, you know, it's very difficult to figure out how to sync up
Yes.
this whole new couple.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Communication with a completely different person is a whole nother thing. Yeah. So I was struggling and listening to podcasts. I hated the word blended. I hated it because I didn't want the past of what we had walked through to define what the future was. And to me, that felt like putting this label and this stigma of what we've walked through. It was almost for me, it was like I can't get away from it. Um, Looking through a ton of content, a lot of it, there was a little bit, a lot of it wasn't either Christian based or faith based, or it was a lot of dynamics of co parenting and sending children back and forth into different homes. And I just was frustrated because I thought, this isn't our story. This isn't our dynamic. I don't need to listen to an episode on co parenting. We're parenting together. We're not sending kids back and forth, to step parents and different things. So I was really frustrated. And I think I just called him one day, really felt like I heard the Lord talking to us. We're also trying to figure out what is the vision of us coming together. We had dreamt a little bit through our dating season of the ministry that was in both of our hearts. And it kind of just felt like the Lord speaking to me on, I desperately wanted to be, if I could, what I needed to somebody else. I knew how hard it was. I wanted someone to say to me, I felt that way, and you're not a bad person for feeling that way. Or this is really hard, and you're not a brat that's not thankful for the redemption because of the emotion that you feel. So for me, it was, if I could be that to somebody, I would love to do that because I wanted to stumble on a podcast that I could listen to walking through the neighborhood that would encourage me that what we were dealing with was normal and it was okay. And somebody that had survived it. Because then I started reading these statistics of like when you throw kids into a second marriage, the statistics for divorce skyrocket. And I thought, oh, that's hopeful. But
yeah, and I think for me, it was even, she said that, and at first I'm like, oh, I like listening to podcasts too, but it's completely different than what she listens to. She likes just lifestyle stuff or whatever, and like, we both listen to like different pastors and different things, but I like a lot of like science and like kind of out there stuff, and I want to learn something on all my podcasts. So she's like, she hates listening to what I have. Like if I'm in my car, she's like pausing it because it's just like, economics or something crazy. It's just like weird. And I'm all over the place. So.
Or near death life experience.
Yeah. I listened to some of the stuff that you've done.
You loved it.
With Tony Merkel and on the confessionals. And
such a fan of Tony too.
well, I met him at that conference, the Armed Media, and like, Jerry Ann, who we went with, introduced me to him, and I started listening to some of his episodes. I'm like, oh, I was hooked. I was like,
why did we start ours?
All right.
We're off topic.
I'm already off. Yeah, a little shout out for some people who want some weird stuff. You can go check out the confessionals. It's really awesome. But yeah, so while we started ours, she said that to me and it kind of dawned on me. I'm like, man, we're still figuring this stuff out. Like we don't have this, perfect marriage. We have fights, we have things going on. We have things that we're trying to figure out and navigate and praying for the Lord's wisdom in and all these things. And I'm like, wait, I don't like, what are we going to say? We don't know what we're doing, And so I get to this place and finally, I'm like, you know what? Let's do it. I think we should do this. And I think we'd sat down and we had this idea and we tried it. And I don't think we were very happy with our first result. And then I think we went to the Armed Media thing and met you, and you really encouraged us.
When we went to Armed Media, you were a very much encourager of, we need to be vulnerable and just be unapologetically where we are. And the back of my head's going, we're not therapists, we're not experts. Yeah. Who the heck are we to talk on this?
And so she wanted us to almost be in a better place to start.
Yes.
And I was kind of like, well, I know that's just not where it is. And I think people don't really need this perfect finished work. They just need honesty and what's working, and know that, hey, other people are struggling and dealing with this, and this is okay. And we can pray and we can work and we can slowly get better. And that's kind of where my heart was with it, because I'm thinking, hey, I needed that. That's what I needed. I didn't need somebody to tell me how they've done all this. And I'm like, you're in an impossible place for me to get to. I need the person
Yeah.
that's close to me, like in the status of where they're at.
Achievable.
Yeah, achievable, something achievable. Hey, start with this basic thing, go from there. And even if everything else is messed up, this is a good place to start. And so I was okay, but I also knew that meant we had to be pretty honest about even where we were at times. And then we meet you, and
Yeah.
I think you had really encouraged us and pushed a lot of things like, hey, y'all got to start, just start anything. And a lot of what was said at the Arm Media Conference was just start it, like no one cares. There was a lot of little phrases that were really, I think we wrote down a lot of notes because we're like, dang,
Yeah.
we've really just waited for nothing, just drug our feet. So
It really built a belief in us that we could actually do this.
Yeah.
And just to hear people outside of your own circle who don't know you the way, your close friends and family know you, to say, yeah, you have content, you have something that people would want to hear. That was extremely encouraging.
Yep. So then, and we had a story to tell. I think anytime you go through grief or you go through a situation, learning to tell your story, or that your story is going to be almost a testimony or something for somebody that can kind of grab hold of, like, oh, I can relate to that. I need that. I need to hear this. That was hard for us for a while because we didn't really want to talk about that. Like, we didn't want to, like what she was saying, you almost have to heal to some things to be okay with that God's going to use that.
Well, it's what Sean said. This wasn't the plan. I didn't pray for this testimony. I didn't pray for this story. So
to be like that's your badge a little bit felt hard to start off with. And I think we needed to work through some stuff before we could get to a place where, like, hey, we're not only going to talk about this, but we're going to carry people that are already walking through this. And it's okay that we're a blended family. And, and even recently, like the Lord in the last year or so has really just even dealt with our hearts to, like, this isn't second best. This was his plan from the beginning. And it may even be hard for some people to swallow that pill, but it's like, I truly believe I was destined to meet Laura, and I was destined to raise these boys, and she was to mother my daughter, and for us to be a family. This isn't second best. This is God's best. And I believe that. And that's what he's wanting to do. And I know a lot of people go through that. And I wanted that to be our story. Not that, hey, if you fall into this crazy circumstance, this is like, how you kind of make it.
Yeah.
And it kind of almost be a doom gloom, like, we're not happy, but it's better than nothing,
not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least I'm not alone. Yeah, no, not at all.
So, and that kind of gave us the courage to keep going and push for this. And then we just began to kind of, I think the Lord really just began to navigate what we were going to talk about. And we would just sit and, like, ideas would come to us, and it was just really cool. And there's a lot of stuff we're wanting to work on that I'm trying to research because I want to at least know what I'm saying before I say it. And it's just exciting. It's been really a fun process. So I'm glad we got going.
Being vulnerable, for me, is probably the most challenging thing. And realizing the more you do it, yes, it becomes easier, but also giving each other space. The day we sit down to hit record on his story, I've got to be sensitive to we're about to unpack something. And then same thing for me. I went through a lot of emotion before, leading up to it, a lot of anxiousness, and then a lot afterward, just processing with the Lord and myself. I just did that. Did I do it well? There was a lot of emotion. I think you don't ever arrive at a place where these are real circumstances, real pain, and being okay with you're a human that still has feeling. And while you're vulnerable and you're asking God to breathe on it and help someone else, still honoring yourself that there's a process to it and there's emotion involved in it.
And one thing I remember, I think I said it on our last episode that we did with Kingdom Culture, and you get to this place. I'm losing my train of thought, but you get to this place where you're dealing with all your grief and you're dealing with all this stuff, but you got to come to a place where you realize it's not about you. Like, it's what the Lord wants to do in you, and it's not something that it's like, okay, hey, if I feel all this way, or if I feel all this emotion, or I don't want to talk about it. I think the Lord honestly is blessing our marriage and doing things because of our willingness to actually talk about these vulnerable areas. And I've seen so much healing and
breakthrough
restoration and breakthrough in our own marriage only because we're talking about it. and only because we're doing it. And it's not that we've like, hey, I've mastered
Figured it out. No.
it's okay, this is where we are and this is what we're doing. And it's in that we start getting answers. God starts revealing things. He starts giving us more patience for one another, more grace for one another. And I honestly believe it's only because we started doing this podcast, and it's because he put it on our hearts too. So, yeah.
I think too, in terms of the experts, reading books about step families and all, like pick any book in the space. One thing I think you need to realize, and this isn't to throw shade at those folks, there's a lot of people who do step family related ministry and right who've never had a step family of their own. They're like
Mhm.
psychologists and counselors, and not that they can't do a good job and help people, but I found so many of the resources, it was just all statistics and doom and gloom. And like you talked about,
Yes.
with, well, if you're divorced, just all this stuff with your kids and this and co-parenting. God bless the people who talk about, like, if you can make it work, just don't get married until remarried until all of your kids are out of the house. I'm like, well, I've got like a 4-year-old, so I'm gonna wait like another 14 years and
Us
be
too.
like,
Yep.
that sounds horrible.
Yep.
And so, yeah, and again, not that the experts are bad, but I think what's
Right.
appealing is, like, you guys are enough further down the path for somebody like me or somebody who's earlier in their journey, not even where I'm at, where because you've walked what you've walked, you're expert enough for what I need to hear. Like, you've walked through the same things I have, but you've also stepped through things I haven't had to face yet. And so, you just have to be further enough down the path from the
Yeah.
person you're encouraging in ministry. We're like a year ago, like I felt when I first met you, it's like, and they've got so much of this stuff figured out, and I just feel like I don't even know what way's up or what way's down.
Yeah.
Also, in terms of like being what you needed, I think that's a really great perspective to walk in. That's why someday when you write a book, and I do truly believe this will end up turning into a book someday. That's the reason people write books, is they're wrestling with stuff themselves and still sorting some things out, but they're writing the book they wish they could have had when they faced this journey or where they
Mhm.
started. And so I think that's a good perspective, and just for your podcast in general, to be like, man, what did Christian need, 3 years ago? What did Laura need 5, 6 years ago? And just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
having that, like, because that really humanizes what you're going after, versus you're not just, you're
Yeah.
telling your story, because it's not about you. It's about the redemption that Jesus has worked in and is continuing to work and wants to work in these other people's lives, and your story is what makes it relatable. But I do love, like, keeping it focused on, how God is working in the midst of your marriage. And that, I think that gives hope for other people that, man, I could have that same thing show up in my circumstance. Let's see where to go to wrap this up. We could go so many more places. You kind of answered this a little bit, so I'll push in two different directions as a final multi-part questions. Um, on this side of it, this many episodes in, like, is what's one thing that's surprising that's changed in you,
Mm.
either individually or as a couple, and in terms of the feedback that you've received from people who've listened to the show, what was unexpected? Because it's one thing to create content, but
Yeah.
then when people reach out to you and tell you how God used it in their own life, you're like, well, I never intended that, but that's really cool that
Yeah.
God would do that. So how have you
Yeah.
changed, and how has God used this already to impact people who listen to the show?
Um, I'll say the impact of the show, I was very surprised. The majority currently of people that listen to us are not necessarily blended families or people who have gone through even grief or divorce. The impact that we've had on people just in their walk with the Lord, that was really like, wow, I had such a focus on, loss and divorce and family and parenting, and then had these people who are in super solid families, have great marriages and kids, and then just telling me that like something we said solidified something in their walk with the Lord. That was really cool.
Yeah. And then to go and even a lot of what you were saying with like how we have gotten better, like what's one thing that's happened with this podcast that has kind of helped us in our marriages. I think it's caused us to communicate differently.
For sure.
When you start to talk about, I know people in relationships, you'll have those deep conversations, but this is almost forcing deeper topics and conversations to be had more consistently. And I know for me, I get busy, I can get focused on work and things, and we don't always get to connect and have these great conversations. And this almost gives us a reason to like have these deep conversations and to tackle some areas that we're working on. And it's kind of funny. Some of the topics come out of fights. Like we joke that the episode choosing to fight is a joke in itself when I wrote the title because we had fought 2 weeks before we did that, and that's why we did the episode because we had to fight. We were fighting, but we were fighting to reestablish connection and reestablish things. And so some of it's just been such an intentional, hey, I'm not going to allow this to continue in our marriage. And it's because of the podcasts of what we want to be able to do and what the Lord wants to do that it's creating this, okay, we're going to work these things out where maybe if I didn't have that or I didn't feel like the Lord was pushing on that area, we probably would have let that linger and not worked on those things. So for me, I've definitely in our own marriage, I've noticed that the Lord's really like, all right, I'm going to heal this area, or I'm going to work on this thing. I'm going to teach you patience and all those things. And we're like, yay. But it's been good. But as far as the feedback, I've had some younger, I help out with our youth ministry some, with our youth pastor and just kind of be a youth leader and whatever I need to do. I'm kind of a little utility. I'll just do worship, run sound, meet with the small groups. And I've had a few of the, high school boys come up to me that listen to it. I'm like, kind of think, man, you wanted to listen to this? I guess that's probably not what you want to hear. And they're like, man, I was so encouraged that episode. And, it taught me so many things. And I feel like I'm preparing my heart for what, I'd want in a wife or for marriage, or like even to think about like the complex things. I hadn't even thought about any of that stuff. And it's kind of even that was a shocker for me because I was kind of like, I just assume we're only going to get like, middle aged or early couples or people that are dealing with trauma or,
Right.
hey, they sent this to their cousin because they lost their wife or their husband or whatever. And which is what we thought a lot of the resource was going to be. But even hearing people that are in completely different circumstances, that almost doesn't even seem relatable, are finding that God's using it for even those situations and it's impacting them. And that has been a really huge encouragement. And it's actually been a lot more people than I thought. And even just, we live in a neighborhood. I've walked down, walk into our pool and a random person in a golf cart, which I don't really know, like, oh, I'll listen to your podcast. I'm like, how do you know we do this? And it's like, oh, someone else in the neighborhood that she had talked to at the pool told her, and then they started listening. And I'm like, I don't even know if they go to church, So it's just kind of weird, but it's kind of cool to like see that it's drawing people in and they're finding value in what we're saying. And it's definitely the Lord. I want to give the glory and honor to God because that's why we're doing it. This is a step of obedience for us.
Yeah.
And we've told the Lord, we don't want to make this about what we are and what we're doing. It's about what the Lord's doing through us.
Yeah.
And that's like, to me, the most important foundational piece, because as we continue to glorify Him and be obedient to Him, He's going to make our path straight. He's going to work those things out. He's going to do even more in our marriage and our family. And that's what we're just believing for.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, probably part of the appeal is you're showing how big God has been in helping you walk through to what most people think is the worst thing that could ever happen. Because, I think of the conversations we've all had through the years in our respective journeys of people like, I don't even know what I'd do if I got divorced. I don't even know what I'd do if my spouse died. Like people just can't imagine.
Yeah.
Right.
And then have people like be sane and functional and thriving and still in love with the Lord and seeking Jesus and not just be this complete dumpster fire and disaster. People are like, wow, God must be real. Because if I had faced your journey, Laura, it would have destroyed me. If I had faced your journey, Christian, it would have destroyed me. And to be on the other side of these things, and it's still grieving and walking out as we all are in various ways, but to still love the Lord and be pursuing Him and all the things like, think of how many people when they face divorce or the loss of a spouse walk away from God because they're so broken and so hurt. So I think that's part of the appeal is be like, well, God's really big and actually redeems. It's not all doom and gloom. I think too, in terms of, I love what you shared about how it's causing you to have to deal with things and talk some things like you're wrestling with things anew. And you'll find this someday when you write, like it's the same kind of thing. Cause when any of us write or share in say a spoken or video medium as well, when we're sharing our stories, we're pulling some band-aids off and we're having to reprocess. And I would wonder too, like, are you finding out new things about each other that you'd never shared before? Because to share your story in a long format, it's not what we do normally when we're just talking or talking like, oh, why are you having a bad day? Well, this is the anniversary of this or whatever it might
Mm-hmm.
be. I guess this will be like my actual next closing question. Like, have you been surprised by
Yeah.
like new things you've learned about each other that only because of the podcast it's come up?
Yeah, definitely. Um, just the opportunity, I guess, from doing this has opened up a few things. Like we led a small group at church on blended families. And so I remember sitting there listening to him share. When you're sharing in a room full of people or on this type of platform, you share different than when it's just the two of you in a room. And it's not a good or bad thing, it's just different. And so you see aspects of their heart that you didn't see before. It's communicated in a way that maybe you understand it better than you did, for sure. And I think I've learned the most about myself and the way I communicate, because I don't know what that is, if it's my personality, but this forces you to communicate without your emotions leading. And so you're thinking through. I lay out a lot of our podcasts. I do a lot of the outline and the questions. That's given me a lot of tools for my communication in the way we react with each other or interact with each other.
Which I find funny because I'm more of like a plan, things like that. But when it comes to podcasts, I'm like, I don't need a plan.
He wants to
Let's just
wing
go.
it.
Let's just do this thing. I'm gonna talk about it, and I can ramble for days. So that's not always the best. So it does help. She has an outline, but I think to even say some more things about things that we've really learned and how it's helped our marriages. I do think our communication has grown, and it's made me understand her more. Because sometimes I think I may know things, or I think I may be aware of things, and then she says it. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I knew that. I don't know if I actually thought that was a problem, and we're expressing a topic and something may come out and, the audience hears it, thinks I'm just aware. And I'm like, I'm actually like, oh man, I didn't know that. So there are little moments I'm like, it's kind of been like I'm making a little mental note as we're talking because it's actually helping me understand her heart and her needs. And if anyone's in a relationship, anyone's married, anyone's dealing with being in a relationship, that there's an intentionalness that makes things work. It's not just, it just clicks and man, it's magic. It's like, nope, it's a daily, intentional, and I have to notice these things or I have to be aware of these things or, she won't feel loved or vice versa. I won't feel loved because it seems like they don't care. So I've noticed there's been a lot of things for me throughout different episodes that I've made like little mental notes like, oh, that's good. I didn't know that you liked that, or I didn't know you needed that, or I didn't know that mattered that much to you. Because maybe it was said in passing, but in this situation, it's deep and it's like we're talking about something and it matters. So it's like, okay. So those have been some things that I noticed I've picked up on that I think it's helped me and hopefully allowed me to become better in those areas. So
It's also forcing me into his world, which is audio, visual, lighting.
she loves my lighting. We found out today.
We had a little tiff about that before this started.
It's like, I can't do lights on my face. It's going to give me a migraine. I'm like, well, I don't know how to do this another way,
That was a world that he's fully been immersed in for a very long time. I know nothing about it. So it definitely felt like there was this huge separation and he's got this world. I have no grid for it, no understanding for it. And I really had no reason to come out to this studio that we have until the podcast. So it's really brought me into his world and an understanding into what he does every day, even outside of the podcast. And even though I don't fully understand it to the level he does, it's definitely brought connection in an area where there was none.
Yeah.
So
it's all preparation for when you do TV someday for your book. Don't worry, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Well, and I can say like even this, like I've been podcasting for 10, 11 years. I was a publicist for many years. So I'm sending authors to go do TV and all kinds of crazy things. And then, when you start doing a little bit of that yourself, like to go from, whether it's in your studio or like me in my office here, this is one thing. But then to go do TV with the live studio audience and all the thing, that's this other next level. But I like God will use these early days of just being in the studio to prep you for what's ahead. Because just being confident in front of a microphone and in front of a camera, like it's the same thing. It's just the scale's bigger. And so,
yeah.
yeah, you'll I have no doubt you'll get there. Someday you'll be telling your story on TV. Not saying that's a prophetic word, but it'll happen. Don't worry.
We need phone calls with Sean more. This is good.
Encouragements.
Yeah, for
Yes,
sure.
yes. I'll just pour into you in amounts that aren't scary. In terms of people connecting with you, finding you guys, I know you have obviously you're available on all podcast platforms. But you do post a lot on social media related to the show to help people find you. So,
Yeah.
what are your handles on the social medias?
Yeah. So it is at blended_podcast. So the show on all of the podcast platforms is Blended with Christian and Laura, but our handle on social media is at blended_podcast.
Yep. And we're working on some stuff. We're going to be, launching a website soon and some other things like that. So we'll be on the lookout on our social media for those things as they come out. We want to try to, down the road, give more resources and even some takeaway stuff that maybe you could get from our website and different things like that. So.
And you can even find us on our personal Instagrams. Both of us are pretty active on there. I'm at LA Musgrove, and he's at Christian Musgrove.
I just reshare her stories, so if you follow her, you'll get more content.
Yeah.
Well, and we'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the description and the show notes. I think we've mentioned a book or two. I'll have links to the podcast and links to their social media. And I think for in terms of people always when they love your show, they always want more content from you. And I think what people don't realize is how much actual planning and post production and works just producing an audio podcast, let alone a video podcast. And if you're somebody like Christian who works in this space, it's even worse. It's worse because you're a perfectionist and you want to do it well.
For sure.
And it has to be good enough and just right. And so it's a blessing on the front end if you know all that stuff, but it also puts you in this world where like, I do this at this high level for everybody else. My thing can't be terrible.
Yeah.
So
there's been some learning curves too, because this is different from what I'm used to. Like I'm, doing live worship and doing concerts and things like that. And then you get into a studio. Like, how do they make it sound like that? You're like relearning some of the basics, which is fun.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. And I encourage them before we got into the interview that someday they'll have to do more video just because I know y'all will connect with them differently in video than you will with audio. So, but that's part of the future stuff that you'll have to wait for. Again, links in the show notes, everything you need to connect with Christian and Laura and find out about the show. Again, to all of you who've taken the time to get to the end of this long episode, thanks so much for watching this great conversation. Again, Blended with Christian Laura, available on all of the places you listen to and download podcasts. And Christian Laura, thanks for pouring into me again, as you always do. And to my audience, I just appreciate you sharing your story.
Gosh, Sean, thank you for having us. We love you so much.
Yeah.
We haven't known you long, but it's the same thing as when we met. It feels like we've known you a long time.
Yeah.